The courtroom fell silent as the man in the $15,000 suit scrolled through his phone, not even bothering to look at Judge Frank Caprio on the bench. Victor Antonov wasn't just wealthy, he was obscenely rich, real estate magnate, shipping tycoon. The kind of wealth that doesn't appear on Forbes' list because it's hidden across 4 continents. He was here for 17 parking violations accumulated over 6 months. Cars abandoned in handicapped spaces, fire lanes, even blocking a hospital emergency entrance. But Victor Antonov didn't look like a man facing consequences. He looked bored. Judge Caprio adjusted his reading glasses, the gesture somehow conveying more authority than any gavel strike. At 78 years old, he'd presided over this courtroom for decades, becoming famous for his compassion, the judge who saw people, not cases. But today, something was different. The warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something harder. "Mr. Antonov," Judge Caprio began, his Rhode Island accent cutting through the silence, "you've been summoned here regarding 17 parking violations. Do you understand why these laws exist?" Victor finally looked up, not at the judge, but at his attorney, a sharp woman in a gray suit who'd flown in from Manhattan. She nodded slightly, and he turned to Judge Caprio with a cold smile. "Your Honor, with respect, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My organization contributes over $40 million to this city's economy. Surely we can find a more proportionate resolution to what amounts to clerical issues." The courtroom stirred. The prosecutor, a young woman named Sarah Chin, straightened in her chair. Judge Caprio set down his glasses deliberately. "Mr. Antonov, are you suggesting that your financial investments exempt you from the same laws that apply to everyone else?" Victor's smile widened. He was enjoying this now. "Your Honor, I'm suggesting there are different levels of civic participation. When my drivers park in these locations, it's because we're conducting business that generates jobs and tax revenue. The city needs us more than we need the city. Context matters, doesn't it?" Someone in the gallery gasped softly. Judge Caprio leaned back, a position those who knew him recognized as the calm before a storm. "Let me make sure I understand. You believe wealth buys exemption from civic responsibility. That money creates a separate class of citizenship. Is that accurate, Mr. Antonov?" Victor's confidence soared. He'd bought politicians, silenced journalists, made regulators disappear in 3 countries. A small-town judge wasn't going to intimidate him. "Your Honor, let's be realistic. This court, this building, even your salary, it's all funded by taxpayers like me, people who create value. I'm not above the law, but some laws are designed with flexibility for those who can afford the convenience. Parking violations are essentially optional taxes. I can pay them, so let's skip the moral theater and discuss the fine." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Caprio raised one hand, and silence fell instantly. "Mr. Antonov," he said quietly, his voice carrying steel, "I think you've made a serious miscalculation about where you are and who you're talking to. But before I respond, I'd like to introduce you to some people." He gestured to the prosecutor. "Ms. Chen, call our first witness." Victor's attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, this is a parking violation hearing, not a trial." "Sit down, counselor," Judge Caprio interrupted, still quiet but immovable. "I'm invoking my discretionary authority. This hearing just became an inquiry into contempt and potential obstruction of justice. Mr. Antonov has made claims about the nature of law in my courtroom. I intend to examine those claims thoroughly." The attorney sat. Victor's smile finally faltered, and a woman in her 60s wearing hospital scrubs started making her way to the witness stand. Margaret Delacroix gripped the witness stand railing with arthritic hands. She wore the light blue scrubs of Rhode Island Hospital's emergency department, her name tag still hanging around her neck. "Ms. Delacroix," Judge Caprio said gently, "please state your occupation." "I'm a triage nurse at Rhode Island Hospital. 31 years this October." "Can you tell us about March 17th? Margaret's jaw tightened as she looked directly at Victor. I was working triage that night. Around 11 p.m., we got a call. 73-year-old man, cardiac event 3 minutes out. We were ready, except the ambulance couldn't reach the emergency entrance. A black Mercedes S-Class was blocking it. No driver, no hazard lights, just parked there, blocking the entire bay. Sarah Chen displayed a photograph of the vehicle. We had to redirect the ambulance to the main entrance. Margaret continued, her voice shaking. An extra 150 feet. By the time the patient reached us, he was in full cardiac arrest. We revived him, but he'd suffered massive damage. 3 weeks in ICU. He'll be on disability for life because his heart can't handle exertion anymore. The courtroom was silent except for the stenographer's machine. Did the hospital file a report? Judge Caprio asked. We did. The car was registered to Antonov Development Corporation. We called 6 times. No one ever responded. The car stayed there 45 minutes before it was finally towed. Victor's attorney was writing furiously. Victor had gone very still. Ms. Delacroix, Judge Caprio said quietly. What was the patient's name? Robert Chen, city bus driver for 40 years. Never missed a day until his heart attack. She pointed to Sarah Chen. One of his daughters is sitting right there. Every head turned to the prosecutor, whose professional mask was cracking. My father, Sarah said, her voice barely steady, will never work again. His medical bills exceeded $400,000 because the extended treatment was deemed preventable. If that ambulance had reached the ER entrance directly, his prognosis would have been completely different. Judge Caprio removed his glasses, cleaning them slowly. Mr. Antonov, that Mercedes was one of 17 violations. Ms. Chen, tell us about the others. Sarah pulled up a detailed spreadsheet. 6 violations in handicapped spaces, 4 in fire lanes, 3 blocking bus stops during rush hour, 2 in snow emergency zones. And one I want to address specifically. April 3rd at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, a new photo appeared. A black Bentley parked directly on a wheelchair ramp. This vehicle blocked wheelchair access during a ceremony honoring World War II veterans. Several veterans, including a 94-year-old man named Thomas Marconi, had to use a secondary entrance. Mr. Marconi traveled from Connecticut specifically for this event. He passed away 6 weeks later. His family said missing that opening presentation, being treated like an afterthought, took something from him he never got back. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Antonov? Judge Caprio asked. Victor found his voice, though it had lost its arrogance. Your Honor, I employ 12 drivers. I can't personally monitor every parking decision. Your Honor! A voice from the gallery. An elderly man standing with his daughter's support. He wore a veteran's cap covered in military pins. I'm Anthony Marconi, Thomas's brother. I was there that day. I saw the driver, young guy in a suit. He looked right at the wheelchair symbol and parked anyway. When I knocked on his window, you know what he said? The courtroom held its breath. He said, "My boss pays more in taxes than you made in your whole life, old man. Find another ramp." Anthony's voice broke. We served this country. We came home to a promise of dignity and equality, and this arrogant... Mr. Marconi, Judge Caprio said gently, your testimony is noted. Please sit. Victor had gone pale, staring at Anthony with something that might have been shame. Judge Caprio pulled out a thick folder. Mr. Antonov, my staff has been investigating your relationship with Providence, and what we found was illuminating. Judge Caprio stood from his bench, something he rarely did during proceedings. At 78, he wasn't tall, but he seemed to fill the entire courtroom. Mr. Antonov, you said this court is funded by taxpayers like you. Let me educate you about civic society and the rule of law. He walked down from the bench, standing directly in front of Victor, who had to look up to meet his eyes. This building was built in 1975 with federal grants and state bonds, paid for by generations of Rhode Island taxpayers who will never earn what you spend on a single car. This courtroom exists not because of people like you, but in spite of people like you. It exists to protect the Margaret Delacroix and Robert Chins from the kind of arrogance you displayed today. He turned to address the entire room, his voice rising. My salary is $127,000 per year, public record. I've served this community for 37 years, presiding over 250,000 cases. You know what I've learned? That the measure of a society isn't its wealthiest citizens, it's how we treat the most vulnerable, whether a nurse can get an ambulance to the ER, whether a 94-year-old veteran can access a ceremony honoring his service with dignity, whether the law applies equally to someone in a rusted Honda and someone in a $300,000 Bentley. He turned back to Victor. You said parking violations are optional taxes for those who can afford convenience. Let me tell you what they actually are. Protections. That handicapped space guarantees a disabled person can access a building with autonomy. That fire lane is the difference between firefighters reaching a blaze in 3 minutes or 7. That emergency bay is the threshold between life and death. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And you treated all of it like an inconvenience you could purchase your way past. Victor tried to speak. Your Honor, I apologize. I'll pay whatever fine. You'll be quiet, Mr. Antonov, because I'm not finished. Judge Caprio returned to the bench. Ms. Chen, show us the April 29th incident. New images appeared. A small pharmacy with a faded sign, Delgado Family Pharmacy, Exchange 1952. This, Judge Caprio said, is a business 3 blocks from one of your developments. The owner, Miguel Delgado, 71 years old, ran it for 43 years, until you destroyed it. The next image showed construction barriers surrounding the storefront. On April 29th, Mr. Delgado arrived to find his entrance blocked, no notice. Your company had started utility work, blocking his business for 6 weeks, and that same day, your vehicle parked in his loading zone for 9 hours, preventing deliveries. He lost $180,000 in revenue. His customers found other pharmacies. When the work finished, he discovered it was prep for your luxury condos, starting at $2.4 million each. A photo appeared of an elderly Latino man in a pharmacist's coat, standing before a closed storefront. Mr. Delgado closed 3 months ago. At 71, no chain will hire him. He and his wife sold their house, now rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Pawtucket, living on Social Security. Judge Caprio's voice hardened. Mr. Delgado is in this courtroom. Would you please stand, sir? An elderly man in the 3rd row stood, still wearing his white pharmacist's coat, though he had no pharmacy. Mr. Delgado, Judge Caprio said gently. Where are you working now? I'm not, Your Honor. My wife and I lost everything. Thank you, sir. Please sit. Judge Caprio fixed Victor with a stare that could cut steel. Still think your money makes you special, Mr. Antonov? Still think you can buy your way past consequences? Victor stood suddenly, his chair scraping. Your Honor, please. I want to make this right. Whatever it costs, sit down. The command was quiet, but Victor sat immediately. You think this is about money? Judge Caprio's voice was soft, almost sad. You think you can write a check and purchase absolution? Mr. Antonov, some things cannot be bought. Justice cannot be bought. Dignity cannot be bought. Redemption cannot be bought. Judge Caprio pulled out a document that made Victor's attorney sit forward with alarm. Mr. Antonov, my staff hasn't just investigated your parking violations. We've audited your entire relationship with Providence. You mentioned $40 million in investments. What you didn't mention is that those came with $12.3 million in tax breaks for one project alone, plus $7 million in city-funded infrastructure improvements that primarily benefit your properties. He turned to another page. But here's where it gets interesting. Do you know Catherine Reeves, former city councilwoman who retired last year? Victor's face went blank. No, Your Honor. In her archived files, we found emails between Ms. Reeves and your Director of Development, Bradley Hutchins. Judge Caprio picked up a printed email, March 2023. Quote, Catherine, Antonov Development is prepared to make a $50,000 campaign contribution in exchange for your support on the Harborview zoning variance. End quote. The courtroom erupted. Victor's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, my client cannot be held responsible. Sit down, or I'll hold you in contempt. Your client signed the payment authorization. I have the documents. Victor visibly flinched. Catherine Reeves did the right thing. She reported it and declined. But we found similar emails for 4 other projects. 2 officials accepted and supported you. 2 didn't, and suddenly found their permits delayed, their calls unreturned. Judge Caprio set down the papers. You walked in here saying you essentially own this court. What you really believe is that government exists to serve your interests, that officials can be purchased, that laws are negotiable for the wealthy. Victor's hands were shaking. Your Honor, political contributions are legal. Every developer does it, Judge Caprio finished. That's your defense? Everyone else does it? Mr. Antonov, the law is not just what's technically legal. It's a social contract, an agreement to put the common good ahead of individual convenience, to protect the vulnerable even when it costs us something, to honor our neighbor's dignity even when they can't do anything for us. He stood again. You broke that contract. Not just with parking violations. Those are symptoms. You broke it when you treated this city like a resource to be exploited. When you used wealth to influence policy without regard for who it would harm. When you built an organization that crushes small businesses, inconveniences veterans, delays emergency care, and doesn't even notice the human cost. The courtroom was silent except for quiet crying from the gallery. So, here's what I'm gonna do. Judge Caprio pulled out a legal document. I'm finding you guilty on all 17 violations. Maximum enhanced penalties, $156,600, but that's just the beginning. He began reading. 1. 8 hours community service with Providence EMS, learning what happens when emergency vehicles are delayed. 2. Full day with the Disabilities Commission, navigating Providence in a wheelchair. 3. Personal meeting with Miguel Delgado, providing full documentation of how your development affected his business. 4. Establish a $500,000 fund for small businesses displaced by your projects. 5. Comprehensive ethics training for all employees, reviewed by a city-appointed oversight board. 6. Every future project requires a community impact statement. 7. Fund surveillance cameras at every hospital ER entrance, monitored by citizen review. 8. Return here in 1 year with proof of completion. He paused. If you fail any requirement, I refer your case to the Attorney General for investigation of those political contributions. That investigation would be thorough, public, and very expensive. Victor looked sick, but I'm giving you a choice. Accept these terms and learn what it means to be a genuine community member. Or appeal, fight it. Probably win on technicalities with your excellent lawyers. Judge Caprio leaned forward. But if you fight, I'll use every tool I have to make it as public and damaging as possible. Every email, every contribution, every displaced business, all of it becomes public record. And when you're done winning legally, you'll have lost any chance at redemption. Absolute silence. So what's it going to be, Mr. Antonov? Buy your way out like always, or face what you've done and try to become better? Victor sat frozen, his attorney whispering urgently. But something was cracking inside him, layers of insulation and entitlement finally giving way. When he stood, he wasn't standing to argue. He turned to face the gallery. Victor Antonov's hands shook as he faced the people he'd harmed. I don't know how to do this, he began, his accent thick with stress. "I've given many speeches to investors, boards, politicians. I always knew what to say. But right now, I don't have adequate words." He looked at Margaret Delacroix. "Ms. Delacroix, I'm sorry. It feels empty, but I don't have better words. Your patient suffered because of my negligence, not personal negligence. That's the shield I want to hide behind. But his honor is right. I built an organization that doesn't care about people like Mr. Chen. I built it in my image." Robert Chen stood slowly in the back row, moving carefully. A man permanently damaged by 4 minutes of delayed care. Victor saw him and broke. "Mr. Chen, I've built buildings, made money, thought that was success. But you drove a bus for 40 years, serving your community every single day. And my car, my employee, my culture, it took that from you. Your health, your career, your future." He turned to Anthony Marconi. "Mr. Marconi, I'll never meet your brother Tommy. I can never apologize to him. But what happened at that ceremony represents everything wrong with how I've lived. Your brother fought for a country that promised equality. I repaid that sacrifice by treating his memorial like an inconvenience." Anthony nodded, crying, his daughter holding him. Victor looked at Miguel Delgado. "Mr. Delgado, I destroyed 43 years of your life's work, your father's legacy, your community's pharmacy, and I didn't even know your name until today. I knew there was a pharmacy, knew it would be impacted, but I didn't think about you. You were just an obstacle to manage." Miguel stood slowly. "Mr. Antonov, I'm 71. I know people can change. But change requires more than words. It requires action. My pharmacy is closed. That cannot be undone. But what will you do for the next small business facing what I faced?" Victor nodded, wiping his eyes. "Judge Caprio, I accept your terms. All of them. Not because I'm afraid, though I am, but because I need to understand what I've done. I need to see what I've been blind to. I need to try to become someone who deserves to be part of this community." He faced the judge. "I know you don't believe me. I've given you no reason to. But I'm asking for a chance. Not to buy my way out. To genuinely try to change." Judge Caprio studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Antonov, I've done this for 37 years. I've learned to tell the difference between someone sorry they got caught and someone beginning to understand what they've done. I can't know which you are. Only time will tell." He raised his gavel. "But everyone deserves a chance at redemption. Not because they've earned it, you haven't, but because that's what justice means. Holding people accountable while believing they can become better." The gavel struck. "The court accepts your commitment. Fines of $156,600 due within 30 days. Community service begins immediately. Meet my staff tomorrow at 9 a.m. He paused, expression softening slightly. "One more requirement. Once a month for the next year, come back to this courtroom, sit in the gallery, and watch me hear cases. See the single mothers who can't pay tickets because they're choosing between fines and groceries. See the elderly struggling with property taxes. See the working families navigating a system not designed for them." He pointed to the gallery. "Remember that government doesn't exist to serve people like you. It exists to protect people from people like you. If you can learn that deeply enough to change how you make decisions, then maybe you'll earn the right to call yourself a community member." Judge Caprio struck the gavel again. "This court exists to ensure every person, rich or poor, is held to the same standard of respect for our shared social contract. Mr. Chen, Mr. Delgado, Mr. Marconi, Ms. Delacroix, thank you. Your courage made a difference today. This court is adjourned." The final strike echoed through the room. And then something remarkable happened. Miguel Delgado walked over to Victor and extended his hand. "Mr. Antonov, I will pray that God gives you strength to become the person you promised today. And I pray that 1 year from now, you will have earned the forgiveness you seek. Victor gripped his hand with both of his own, unable to speak through tears. Robert Chen approached, placing his hand on Victor's shoulder. If you actually do this community service, if you learn from it, you might save someone from what happened to me. That would be worth something. One by one, they came forward. Anthony Marconi gave him his brother's military pin. Carry this. Remember what service means. Margaret Delacroix handed him the EMS coordinator's card. Call tomorrow. They're expecting you. Judge Caprio watched from the bench, moisture in his eye. This moment, accountability meeting grace, justice, creating the possibility for redemption, this was why he dedicated his life to this courtroom. As Victor left surrounded by those he'd harmed, now supporting his first steps toward change, Judge Caprio sat alone for a moment. He thought about tomorrow's docket. 50 more cases, 50 more people seeking justice or mercy or just a fair hearing. And he smiled. Because as long as he sat in this chair, he would continue offering what he'd offered Victor Antonov. Not just judgment, but the possibility of becoming better. That was justice. Real justice. The kind that changed lives and reminded everyone, powerful and powerless alike, that the law exists to protect our shared humanity. If this story moved you, subscribe and share. Because every week we bring you real cases where justice restores dignity, and even the powerful learn what true accountability means.